Hi YouTube. This is a video tutorial for Parsvottanasana. Parsvottanasana is a one-leg standing forward fold. The posture is commonly called pyramid, although the translation is actually Parsva is side and Uttanasana is intense posture. Uttanasana is the standing forward fold with the legs together. This shows up in a sun salutation where the legs hip width. And so side Uttanasana, Parsvottanasana, a side intense posture. And the work of this posture, if I begin by stepping back, or the foundation of this posture, is that you want the frontal hips to basically become, the term people use is square. And that generally means that people have to give themselves some freedom in the back leg. So the back leg may move to the side a little bit, it may move laterally, the foot may turn into about a 45-degree angle, and then for most, the frontal hip bones, the navel, the nipples will point in the same direction. You could also use the AC joint in the shoulder, the acromion. AC is acromion clavicular. That's where a part of the shoulder and the collarbone meet. But for most, frontal hip bones are a good landmark. And so what I see in this posture is that students end up with a stance that is both too narrow, say front heel in line with inner arch of the back foot, and a back foot that's at 90 degrees. And that limits most people. Every now and then you meet somebody that can maintain that and square off the hips, but that's a 1 in a million type of person. I've seen very, very few over the course of my yoga career, and I've done yoga a long time in a number of different settings with a number of different practitioners of different styles. And if someone's militant about this, the pressure goes to the knee. That if the foot doesn't move and you force the hip, the knee is right in the middle. And the knee has a little rotation to it, and there are postures that build that knee rotation. Jano Shirshasana C in the Ashtanga Primary Series is a good example of a posture that builds rotation at the knee. Lotus forces a little rotation at the knee, Padmasana. But the knee is right in the middle, so if you force the hips and don't give yourself any freedom in that foot, you are likely to injure the knee, or at least put stress and torque on it that it doesn't want. So, by having the foot a little out to the side and giving yourself a little freedom in that foot, the frontal hips can point straight ahead, and that sets you up for success. Now, if I step to the side plane, and I step this foot back, and it's hidden by the dog, but I can assure you I've turned it to about 45 degrees, and I've taken my front hip bones forward, then I can bend into this knee. And by bending into this knee, it lets the abdomen and thigh touch. And when the abdomen and thigh touch, the lower back and the sacrum tends to, I'll use this hand, tends to release and round. I believe because the body thinks you're going towards a squat, where the spine is quite rounded. So, if I'm here, belly and thigh touching, then I see if the hamstring will start to straighten. And if people are honest with themselves and don't let the abdomen release from the thigh as the leg straightens, but keep it connected, they usually reach a point where the pose maxes out. That because this is asking both the lower back and back of the pelvis to round, while the hamstring straightens, you reach the point where the two of them won't move together anymore in unison. And if people really come to that point, generally you'll see their leg kind of bounce. That means you're really kind of in that point. You can either work there or back off a bit. That can be up to you. But eventually it is possible that the knee straightens, the belly and thigh remain in contact. And there are options with the hands. I like to rest my nose on my shin. You'll see Ashtanga practitioners rest the chin and look at the foot. I don't like the angle that puts in my neck, and it's putting the cervical curve, the neck curve, in direct opposition to the rest of the spine. But if I rest the forehead, that lets the neck and spine take a similar shape. Resting the nose is somewhere in the middle. I like that unison. I like letting the head rest, but that's just me. You'll see people rest hands on the floor or reach back. Doesn't necessarily matter here. I wouldn't encourage a pulling on this leg. If you're going to touch, it's just to give the hand something to do, right? I'm not using my bicep strength, trying to pull myself deeper. If the hands are on the floor, maybe just the fingertips, so you're not using it as balancing support, you'll see in Ashtanga that people take a reverse prayer, a Paschima Namaskar. I could retract the shoulder blades, internally rotate the ball and socket joint, bend the elbows, middle finger touch, ring finger touch, pinky finger touch, sides of pinkies touch. If that happens, I can close the shoulder blades again, I can retract them further, and the prayer closes. Belly and thigh, straighten the leg, rest my nose. And this would be a more classic Ashtanga presentation. To come out of this, I'd like to transition into that lunge. That lunge gives you a lot of spring, so I'm on the ball of my back foot, my heel is lifted. I recognize it might be hidden behind the dog, but that gives me a spring forward. I basically did that to step forward. I'll take the other side. Stepping back, giving myself freedom in the back leg and foot. Get the front hips pointing straight ahead. Could bend the knee, belly to thigh, could straighten. Rest my nose, maybe my forehead. Again, maybe reaching back but not pulling. Maybe fingertips on the floor. Maybe holding onto this. Again, more classic Ashtanga. Retraction of the shoulder blades, they move towards the spine. Internal rotation of the ball and socket joint. Elbows bend. Touch the sides of the pinkies together. Retract the shoulder blades further. Belly and thigh. And it's on one leg. Standing hamstring stretch. To transition the back foot into that lunge, that allows me to step forward. In Ashtanga Yoga, this posture is entered from the side plane, and I don't like that entry. I have felt both within my own practice and teaching students over the years that what happens is when people try to enter these postures on the side plane, that they have a lot of trouble making the frontal hip bones point in the same direction, and there's a lot of shuffling of the feet that has to happen. Whereas if you're stepping back, eventually you can just step back into the right position. And if students don't know how to shuffle their feet, their postures can distort quite a bit from one side to the next as they kind of keep their feet planted and just try to pivot. And it can make the posture too narrow, right to left, so they don't get the full effect on the hips. Again, it can make the pose different side to side. And sometimes the posture also gets too long. And that when you're stepping back, stepping back tends to keep you honest. There's only so far that is comfortable to step backwards, versus if you're on the side, right, that I could stand like this, and that's a decent distance for something like a side angle or a warrior two. It's a little long for a triangle, and it's not great for a Parsvottanasana. I mean, I could make that happen, but it's not as stable, it doesn't feel as good, it's harder to get the hips in the right place. So I like this front back entry. I like the side entry for the postures that I showed, where the pelvis is open. Warrior two, slight angle posture, triangle posture. There are a number of postures where the hips are in this open position, where you're not trying to square the hips, you're not trying to stack the hips. But for the frontal plane postures, Parsvottanasana, warrior one, twisting triangle, twisting side angle, all of those postures I find people benefit from the stepping front to back. Stepping front to back also gives you this very kind of momentary pseudo warrior three, and strengthens the glutes. That this leg is extending, that glute is firm, that hamstring's firm. There's not enough glute and hamstring strengthening in yoga. I had an Iyengar teacher who would hand me a wooden dowel. I don't have a wooden dowel handy, but I have this wooden sword. And he would have me work in this posture by giving me a dowel and having me fold over it. And that gave me a lot of reference, especially if I keep, right, I keep that here and I try to keep my frontal hips in line with it. I have to hold this side up because it's only pinned up one side. But that is both creating a little more rounding in my lower back as I fold over the dowel. It's also giving me a reference of where I am in space. Sometimes I would also work over a folding chair, that if the folding chair was folded, you have the top of the chair here and the legs on the chair here-ish, that as you fold over the chair, you get the contact with both sides. And so it's useful if you have a dowel handy, you can play with that. If you have a folding chair handy, you can play with that. So I'm going to show a variation of Parsvottanasana. And this is a posture that I warm up with basically daily. Or this isn't necessarily a variation of Parsvottanasana. This is the same action as Parsvottanasana, but on a different plane. So some of you will be masked by the dog, but you'll get the idea of it. If I bend the right knee and aim the right knee towards the armpit, that's hip flexion. I can try to ground the left thigh. I can even try to turn the left thigh out. It doesn't turn out to 90 degrees. I could sit upwards, get the belly and thigh to touch. I could point the toe to release my sciatic nerve. And now I'm in a Parsvottanasana on the floor. I could pull the toes back if I want to traction the sciatic nerve or move the ankle. But here it is, belly and thigh are touching, spine is rounded, hamstring is straightening. I do that pose daily as part of my warm-up. It's a very useful posture. Hip flexion, sitting upwards, make it touch, straighten. I could turn this thigh out. Right thigh turns out a little bit more. Again, I could pull the toes back if I want to traction the sciatic nerve. Reaching with the arms, that helps the sit-up. And a useful shape. That was Supta Padangustasana. Supta is supine, padas are feet. Angusta in that sense is your fingers and toes. You'll see people hold the toe. Uttita Hasta Padangustasana is a standing variation. I would work the same way. This is kind of a Bikram presentation of the posture, but I prefer it. I would bend the right knee. I would bring the belly and thigh in contact, just like I did with the sit-up on the floor. And then I can try to straighten the leg. Yes, it's possible to hold the leg. But boy, unsupported sure does make that leg stronger. I'll do the other side. Bending the knee. Belly to thigh. Leg can straighten. Again, it's possible to hold. If I hold, I'm not pulling, just gentle touch, just for reference. I prefer that presentation to, I guess I'd call a more classical Ashtanga presentation that you see. I think there's a lot more work to be done in that one, but an Ashtanga presentation could be, you'll see them lift the leg, they'll lift it straight. They'll hold the toe. Once they have the toe, they'll jack the leg up, and then they try to fold forward to touch the head. And for many, belly and thigh do not end up touching. Balance is tricky on that side. Let's go to the other side. They'll hold, they'll pull. My leg knows I'm pulling it out of place. Here we go. Something like this. Or they'll touch the chin. So, you can try on your own. If I raise my leg straight, it goes here. Right? That's it. If I bend my knee and then straighten the leg, that's much higher. If I bend again and re-straighten, higher yet. So try that on your own. If you bend the knee and then straighten, you can see where the leg goes, versus if you just raise it straight. The other thing that happens, and I'll show on the frontal plane, with that Ashtanga entry, that because the leg is limited here, right, people pull, and they start to do weird stuff with their hips. Right? especially when they go to the side. But that's another video. So I think it's useful. Hip flexion, spinal flexion, knee extension last. Hamstring is the icing on the cake. Protect your spine first, get the spine into its shape. So there's Parsvottanasana, useful posture. I really like the on your back variation. That's a great pose, that's an everyday pose. Standing pose, also useful. The one leg standing, yeah, sure, it's okay. It's an advanced variation. You could practice that one to try to get better at the other ones. That it will feed back, or vice versa. You can practice on the floor to get a little better at standing. So, thank you. Namaste.